I was sitting on my back deck in Breckenridge, Colorado, drinking my morning coffee when I noticed construction equipment being hauled up my private ski slope. That was the moment my peaceful life in the Rockies turned into a complete nightmare, though I had no idea just how bad things were about to get. My name is Andrew Emerson, and I had spent 15 years building my dream property on 8 acres of pristine mountain land. The house sat at the base of what locals called Emerson Run, a beautiful intermediate slope that I maintained for my family and occasionally let neighbors use during winter. I had purchased the land outright in 2010, paid cash, and had the surveys done properly. Everything was legal, documented, and mine. The Mountain Ridge HOA had formed 3 years ago when a dozen new luxury homes went up on the adjacent properties. I was grandfathered in and technically not required to join, but I had signed on anyway to be neighborly. It seemed harmless at the time. The dues were reasonable. They organized a few community events, and I thought it would be nice to have some structure for snow removal on the shared access road. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the activity halfway up my slope. There were at least 6 workers and what looked like foundation materials being unloaded. My stomach dropped. I had not approved any construction on my property. I had not even been contacted about it. I threw on my boots and started hiking up the slope. It was early September, so the mountain was covered in wildflowers and the aspens were just starting to turn gold. The morning air was crisp, and under normal circumstances, I would have enjoyed the walk. But my heart was pounding with anger and confusion. When I reached the construction site, a foreman in a hard hat was directing workers as they poured concrete footings. I walked straight up to him. "Excuse me, what exactly are you building on my property?" The foreman looked up from his clipboard, surprised. "This is the community lodge project. Should be finished in about 6 weeks. Nice design, right? Going to have a fireplace, full kitchen, the works. Community lodge. On whose authority? The HOA, man. I just work for the contractor. They hired us 3 weeks ago." I felt my face getting hot. "This is my land, private property. You need to stop work immediately." The foreman frowned and pulled out some papers. "I got permits here signed by the HOA board president. Everything looks legitimate to me. Maybe you should talk to them." I took the papers and scanned them quickly. They were construction permits issued by Summit County, listing the Mountain Ridge HOA as the property owner. My property, listed as HOA common area. "These are fraudulent," I said, my voice shaking. "I own this land. I never sold it or gave permission for this." "Look, buddy, I do not get paid to sort out property disputes. I got a contract and permits. You need to take this up with whoever you need to take it up with." I wanted to argue more, but I realized he was right. This was not his fault. Someone at the HOA had deliberately misrepresented ownership of my land to get these permits. This was fraud on a grand scale. I walked back down to my house and immediately called my attorney, Richard Moss. We had worked together on my property purchase and a few business deals over the years. He was expensive but thorough. "Richard, I need you at my house today. The HOA is building on my land without permission." "Slow down, Andrew. What happened?" I explained everything while pulling out my property deed and survey documents. Richard arrived 2 hours later, and we walked the property line together with my original survey stakes and GPS coordinates. The construction site was definitely on my land, about 300 feet from the nearest HOA common area. "This is bad," Richard said, photographing everything with his phone. "They either made a massive mistake or they are deliberately trying to steal your land through adverse possession or some other scheme." "Can they do that?" "Not legally, no. But if they get this building up and start using it, they might try to claim they thought it was HOA property all along. It becomes a messier legal battle the longer this goes on. We need to act fast. Richard sent a cease and desist letter that afternoon via email and certified mail to the HOA board president, whose name I learned was Barbara Whitmore. I had seen her at a few HOA meetings, but never really interacted with her much. She was a woman in her mid-50s with bleached blonde hair, and the kind of entitled attitude that came from too much time on her hands and too much influence in a small community. The next morning, Barbara showed up at my door with 2 other board members. I recognized Dennis Kraft, the treasurer, and Susan Mills, the secretary. Barbara was holding my cease and desist letter and looked furious. "Andrew, what is the meaning of this?" she said, waving the paper in my face. "The meaning is that you are building on my private property without permission. That is called trespassing and fraud. That slope has always been community property. Everyone uses it. Everyone uses it because I let them. That does not make it HOA property. I have the deed right here." I showed her my property documents. She barely glanced at them. "Our records show that slope as common area. It was included in the HOA master plan." "Your records are wrong. I never conveyed that land to the HOA. I was not even required to join the HOA when it formed." Dennis stepped forward, trying to play peacemaker. "Maybe there was a misunderstanding with the original survey. Could we sit down and work this out?" "There is no misunderstanding," I said firmly. "That is my land. Stop construction immediately or I will get a court injunction." Barbara crossed her arms. "The community has already raised money for this lodge. We have contracts in place. You cannot just shut this down because of some property line dispute." "It is not a dispute. It is my property. End of story." "We will see what our lawyer says about that," Barbara snapped. She turned and marched back to her Mercedes, the other board members following. Richard filed for an emergency injunction that afternoon. The court hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, construction continued. Every morning I woke up to the sound of hammering and machinery on my slope. It was maddening. I documented everything. I took photos and videos daily, noting the progress and the trespass. I also started researching the HOA's formation documents and discovered something interesting. When the HOA was created, they had submitted a map showing proposed common areas. My ski slope was shaded in green on that map, suggesting it might be included. But there was no legal documentation actually transferring my property to the HOA. It looked like they had created their master plan, assuming they could eventually acquire my slope, then just started acting like they owned it. The court hearing arrived on a Wednesday morning. Richard and I sat on one side of the courtroom while Barbara and the HOA's attorney, a slick guy named Martin Hess, sat on the other. Judge Patricia Romano reviewed the documents carefully. "Mr. Emerson, you are seeking an immediate injunction to stop construction on what you claim is your private property," Judge Romano said. "That is correct, Your Honor. I have a clear deed and survey showing ownership." Martin Hess stood up. "Your Honor, the HOA has been maintaining that slope for 3 years. They have invested community funds based on the understanding that it was common area. Mr. Emerson never objected until now." "That is false," I said. "I have maintained that slope myself. I pay for grooming in the winter." "The HOA has never put $1 into it." "Can you prove that?" Hess asked. "I have invoices from Mountain Grooming Services going back 15 years. I can submit them." Judge Romano held up her hand. "Let me see the deed and the original HOA formation documents." We passed them forward. The judge spent 10 minutes reviewing everything in silence. Finally, she looked up. "The deed is clear. Mr. Emerson owns the property in question. The HOA map showing it as common area appears to be aspirational rather than factual. There is no documentation showing a transfer of ownership. I am granting the injunction. All construction must stop immediately pending resolution of the underlying property dispute. Barbara stood up, her face red. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. The community needs that lodge. Then the community should build it on land it actually owns, Mrs. Whitmore. The injunction is granted. I felt relief wash over me. Richard shook my hand as we left the courtroom, but Barbara blocked our path in the hallway. This is not over, she hissed. You are going to regret making an enemy of this HOA. I did not make an enemy of anyone. You started building on my land without asking. Maybe next time lead with a conversation instead of a bulldozer. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. The HOA filed a countersuit claiming adverse possession and equitable interest in the slope. They argued that, because residents had used it for 3 years, and they had made improvements like clearing brush and adding some safety markers, they had established a claim. It was nonsense legally, but it meant more court dates and more legal fees. Richard estimated this would cost me at least $50,000 to fight properly. I had the money, but it was the principle that bothered me. I had done nothing wrong, yet I was being dragged through the legal system. Then the harassment started. I got a notice from the HOA that my house was in violation of the community standards. They claimed my fence was 6 inches too tall, my mailbox was the wrong color, and I had weeds in my driveway. Each violation came with a $500 fine. I took photos proving none of the violations actually existed. My fence was within code, my mailbox matched the approved color from when I joined, and my driveway was immaculate. But the notices kept coming. They fined me for parking my truck in my driveway instead of the garage. They fined me for having Christmas lights up past January 15th, even though half the neighborhood still had theirs up. They fined me for having a trash can visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was in my side yard behind a fence. Every fine I contested, and every contest required documentation and time. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Barbara was on a mission to make my life miserable. In November, I received notice that the HOA was holding a special meeting to vote on a special assessment. Every homeowner would be charged $5,000 to cover legal fees related to the lodge dispute. Since I was technically still a member, I would owe $5,000 to fight against myself. I showed up to that meeting ready for a fight. About 30 homeowners were there, and Barbara stood at the front with a smug expression. As you all know, we have been forced into litigation by Mr. Emerson, who refuses to recognize the community interest in the ski slope we have all enjoyed. That is a lie, I said, standing up. You started building on my private property without permission. I have every right to defend my ownership. A few people murmured. I recognized my neighbor, Tom Fisher, who nodded at me supportively. Barbara ignored me. The special assessment is necessary to defend our community rights. All in favor. Hang on, Tom said. I want to see the actual property documents. If Andrew owns the land, why are we paying to fight him? The board has reviewed everything and determined we have a valid claim, Barbara said dismissively. Let us see the documents, another homeowner called out. Barbara looked flustered. Those are part of confidential litigation. That is convenient, Tom said. I am voting no until I see proof we actually have a claim. The vote ended up being close, but the assessment passed. I was now on the hook for $5,000 to fund a lawsuit against me. I refused to pay and resigned my HOA membership immediately. Barbara sent me a letter saying I could not resign during active litigation, and the fee was still due. Richard advised me to just pay it to avoid more complications. I refused on principle. They put a lien on my property. Meanwhile, the half-built lodge sat abandoned on my slope. It was a concrete foundation with some framing, covered in tarps and slowly deteriorating. Every time I looked at it, I got angry. The legal battle dragged on through the winter. The HOA's adverse possession claim was weak, but they had a decent lawyer who knew how to drag things out. We had multiple hearings about discovery, about property boundaries, about the interpretation of HOA formation documents. In March, something shifted. Richard called me with interesting news. I have been doing some digging into Barbara Whitmore's background. Turns out she was involved in a similar HOA dispute in Vail 5 years ago. She convinced that board to build a playground on disputed land, and they ended up losing a huge lawsuit. She resigned before the judgment came down. So she has a history of this. Looks like it. Also, I subpoenaed the HOA's financial records. They have been spending money like crazy. The lodge budget was supposed to be $200,000, but they had already spent $300,000 before you shut it down. Where did the extra money go? That is the question. Some of it looks like legitimate overruns, but there are some suspicious consulting fees paid to a company called Mountain Ridge Services. Who owns that? Still working on it, but I would bet money it connects back to someone on the board. This was getting interesting. Richard filed motions to expand discovery into the HOA's finances. Martin Hess fought it hard, which told us we were onto something. In April, we finally got access to the bank records. Richard came to my house with a thick folder and a bottle of whiskey. "You are going to need a drink for this," he said. Mountain Ridge Services was owned by Barbara's husband, Craig Whitmore. Over the past year, the HOA had paid his company almost $100,000 for various consulting services related to the lodge project. Architectural consulting, project management, site analysis, environmental review, all services that were already being performed by other contractors. She was funneling money to herself, I said. Her husband, technically, but yes. And there is more. Dennis Kraft, the treasurer, has a brother who owns the construction company they hired. That company was paid 30% above market rate. This is embezzlement. At minimum, it is self-dealing and breach of fiduciary duty. At maximum, it is fraud. We need to report this to the district attorney. We compiled a detailed report documenting everything and sent it to the Summit County District Attorney's office. I also sent copies to every homeowner in the Mountain Ridge HOA. If they were going to charge me $5,000 to fight their corrupt project, they deserved to know where their money was really going. The response was immediate. My phone started ringing with calls from angry neighbors. Tom Fisher came over in person. "I had no idea," he said. "Barbara told us all you were being difficult and unreasonable. She never mentioned any of this financial stuff. She was stealing from all of you and using my property to do it. We are calling for an emergency meeting to remove the entire board. Will you come?" "Definitely." The emergency meeting was packed. Every homeowner showed up and the mood was angry. Barbara tried to control the meeting, but people shouted her down. "You lied to us," one homeowner yelled. "You spent our money on your husband's fake company." "Those were legitimate expenses," Barbara insisted. "Everything was approved." "Approved by who?" "You and your buddies on the board," Tom said. "We want a full audit and we want you removed. Now." The vote was unanimous. Barbara, Dennis, and Susan were removed from the board immediately. Tom and 2 other homeowners volunteered to serve as interim board members until proper elections could be held. Barbara did not go quietly. She stood up, her face purple with rage. "You people are idiots. I did everything for this community." That lodge would have increased all your property values. You did everything for yourself, I said, and you did it on my land. That slope should belong to the community. You are just a selfish jerk who does not care about anyone but himself. I am someone who owns property and expects it to be respected. If you wanted to build on my land, you should have asked and offered to buy it. Instead, you committed fraud. Barbara grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clicking on the floor. Susan and Dennis followed quickly behind. The new board asked to meet with me the next day. Tom, along with the other two interim board members, Carol Jensen and Mike Patterson, came to my house. "First, we want to apologize," Tom said. "This should never have happened. We trusted Barbara and did not do our due diligence." "I appreciate that. Second, we want to formally withdraw all litigation against you. Your property is your property. We acknowledge that fully." "Thank you." "Third," Carol said, "we know we have a mess to clean up. That half-built lodge on your slope. We are prepared to pay for complete removal and restoration of the site. We will also reimburse you for your legal fees." This was more than I expected. "That is very reasonable." "We also wanted to ask," Mike said carefully, "whether you might consider selling that portion of the slope to the HOA. Not out of any legal claim, but just as a normal real estate transaction. A lot of families really did enjoy using it, and having a proper community facility would be nice. But only if you are willing, and only at a fair price." I thought about it. The lodge had become such a symbol of violation and conflict that my first instinct was to refuse. But these were not the same people who had wronged me. This was a genuine, respectful offer. "How about a compromise?" I said. "I will grant the HOA a permanent easement to use the slope for community recreation. No charge. But I retain ownership, and no permanent structures get built without my written approval. If you want to put up a small warming hut or something, we can discuss it. But it has to be done right with proper contracts and agreements." Tom looked relieved. "That would be amazing. Are you sure?" "I moved here because I love this mountain and I love skiing. I do not have kids, but a lot of you do. I have always been happy to share. I just will not be stolen from." We shook hands and agreed to have Richard draft a proper easement agreement. The new board also agreed to drop all the fines against me and remove the lien on my property. In May, the district attorney's office announced they were filing charges against Barbara Whitmore, Craig Whitmore, and Dennis Kraft. The charges included theft, embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of fiduciary responsibility. Susan Mills was not charged but was named as a cooperating witness. The arraignment was in early June. I sat in the courtroom gallery as Barbara, Craig, and Dennis stood before Judge Romano again, this time in a criminal proceeding. The prosecutor laid out the case. Over 18 months, the three defendants had funneled approximately $150,000 from HOA funds to themselves through various schemes. The lodge project was the centerpiece, but there were other incidents too. Dennis's brother's company had also been hired to repave the community roads at inflated prices. Craig's consulting company had billed for work on a community landscaping project that was never actually completed. Barbara's attorney tried to argue that these were legitimate business expenses, and any overpayment was unintentional. But the prosecutor had emails showing Barbara and Craig discussing how to structure the payments to avoid scrutiny. In one email, Barbara wrote, "Make sure to spread the invoices out so nobody notices the total. These idiots barely read the financial reports anyway." Judge Romano set bail at $50,000 each. All three posted it immediately. The criminal case would take months to work through the system, but the HOA moved quickly to recover funds. They filed a civil suit against Barbara, Craig, and Dennis, seeking full restitution plus damages. They also sued Martin Hess, the HOA's attorney, for malpractice. He had to have known about the fraudulent property claims and did nothing to stop them. In July, the new board organized a community workday to remove the lodge foundation from my slope. About 20 homeowners showed up with tools, and we spent the day breaking up concrete and hauling debris. It was hard work, but there was a good spirit to it. People apologized to me individually, and I accepted. Most of them had been innocent victims of Barbara's schemes. Tom brought beer, and we sat on my deck afterward watching the sunset over the mountain. "You could have made this a lot harder on all of us," he said. "The whole HOA could have collapsed. That would not have helped anyone. Barbara was the problem, not the community. Still, I appreciate how you handled it. A lot of people would have gone scorched earth." I thought about the private ski slope wars I had heard about in Aspen and Vail, where property disputes turned into decade-long feuds. I did not want that life. I just want to enjoy my mountain in peace. Over the summer, the property was restored. We reseeded the disturbed earth, and by August you could barely tell there had been construction. Richard finalized the easement agreement, which was recorded with the county. The HOA had clear permission to use the slope, and I had clear ownership. Everyone knew where they stood. The criminal trial began in September. I attended several days of testimony. The prosecution built a methodical case showing how Barbara had systematically looted the HOA. Several homeowners testified about how she had pressured them to vote for expenditures without full information. Susan Mills testified about board meetings where Barbara intimidated anyone who questioned her decisions. The most damning testimony came from a forensic accountant who traced every dollar. The numbers were stark. Barbara and Craig had essentially treated the HOA like their personal piggy bank. Craig Whitmore took a plea deal halfway through the trial, agreeing to testify against Barbara in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony sealed her fate. He described conversations where Barbara explicitly planned how to use the lodge project to enrich themselves. "She said it was our retirement fund," Craig testified. "She said HOAs had so much money and nobody paid attention. She said it was victim-less because property values would go up anyway." Barbara's attorney tried to argue she had been motivated by genuine desire to improve the community, but it fell flat. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Sentencing was in November. Judge Romano was not sympathetic. "Mrs. Whitmore, you were entrusted with your neighbor's money and their faith. You violated that trust systematically and deliberately. You showed no remorse and attempted to blame everyone but yourself. This court sentences you to 4 years in state prison and orders full restitution of all stolen funds." Dennis Kraft got 2 years. Craig Whitmore got 18 months. All 3 were also ordered to pay fines and were banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. Barbara looked stunned as they led her away in handcuffs. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. She had brought this entirely on herself, but it was still a waste of a life. The civil suit was settled in December. Barbara and Craig's assets were liquidated, including their house in the development. The HOA recovered about $90,000, enough to replenish the reserves and cover the legal costs. Dennis's brother also paid a settlement to avoid further litigation. By the time the holidays rolled around, life in Mountain Ridge had stabilized. The new board was functioning well, focusing on basic services and transparent communication. They published detailed financial reports every month and held regular town halls. I hosted a Christmas party at my house, something I had not done in years. About 40 neighbors came, and we had a bonfire outside with hot chocolate and bourbon. Someone brought a guitar, and we sang carols badly. It was the first time in a year I had felt truly relaxed in my own home. Tom pulled me aside at one point. "I have been meaning to ask, did you ever consider actually letting them keep the lodge once it was built? Before you knew about the fraud, I mean." I had thought about this. Maybe. If they had come to me first, we could have worked something out, but they did not ask. They just took. That was never going to work. What if they had asked? Then we would have negotiated. I probably would have sold them that piece of the slope for a fair price or agreed to a ground lease, something like that. I am not opposed to the community having nice things. I am opposed to theft. That is fair. Looking back, the whole situation was absurd. Barbara could have accomplished her goals legally. She could have approached me with a reasonable offer to buy the land or lease it. We could have worked out a deal that benefited everyone. Instead, she tried to steal, and she lost everything. The slope itself became more popular than ever. The new board installed a couple of benches and a small picnic area at the top, all with my approval. They organized a few community ski days during the winter where families could come up together. I even donated money to buy some ski equipment that the HOA kept available for kids who wanted to learn. It became what Barbara had claimed to want all along, a genuine community resource. But it happened through respect and cooperation, not fraud and theft. In February, I was out grooming the slope on my snow machine when I saw someone hiking up. It was Natalie Torres, a woman who had moved into Barbara's old house. She was younger, maybe early 30s, with a friendly smile. "Andrew, hi. I have been meaning to introduce myself properly. Thank you so much for letting us use this slope. My kids absolutely love it. You are welcome. How are you settling in?" "Great, actually. The neighborhood has been really welcoming. I heard about all the drama from before we moved in. That must have been terrible." "It was not fun, but it worked out. I actually wanted to ask you something. I am on the new events committee, and we are thinking about doing a community Easter egg hunt in the spring. Would you be open to us using the base of the slope for it? We would keep it small and clean everything up after." This was exactly the kind of request I appreciated. Respectful, clear, asking permission. "That sounds great. Just let me know the date so I can make sure I am around if you need anything." "Perfect. Thank you so much." She headed back down, and I continued grooming. The snow was perfect powder, and the morning sun made everything sparkle. This was why I lived here. This was what I had worked 15 years to build. The Easter egg hunt happened in April and was a huge success. About 30 kids showed up, and they spread out across the slope looking for colored eggs. Parents stood around drinking coffee and chatting. Someone brought a speaker and played music. It was wholesome and fun, exactly what community events should be. I hid a few special golden eggs with gift cards inside, and watching the kids find them was genuinely joyful. One little girl, maybe 5 years old, found one and shrieked with excitement. Her dad came over to thank me. "This is really generous of you, letting us do this on your property. It is just land. Might as well share it." Still, after what happened with the previous board, I would not have blamed you for putting up fences and telling everyone to stay away. That would not have been much fun for anyone. In May, I attended the first regular HOA elections since Barbara's removal. Tom ran for president and won easily. Carol and Mike stayed on the board, and they were joined by Natalie and a retired engineer named Paul Hendricks. It was a solid group of level-headed people. Tom's first act as official president was to present me with a plaque at the community meeting. It read, "To Andrew Emerson, for his generosity and patience, in gratitude from your neighbors at Mountain Ridge." I was not big on public recognition, but I appreciated the gesture. More importantly, I appreciated that the community had learned from the disaster. They implemented new financial controls, including requiring dual signatures on any expenditure over $5,000 and mandatory annual audits by an independent firm. They also created a formal process for property disputes that required mediation before litigation. Richard told me these were unusually robust safeguards for an HOA. Most operated on trust and informal processes. But Mountain Ridge had learned the hard way what could go wrong. Summer brought more community events, all properly organized with clear permissions. There was a 4th of July barbecue, a concert series at the community park, and a Labor Day picnic. I attended most of them and found myself actually enjoying being part of the community in a way I never had before. In August, I got a letter from the Colorado Department of Corrections. Barbara Whitmore had requested to include me on her approved correspondence list. Inmates could write to people with permission. I thought about it for a few days and declined. I had nothing to say to her, and I doubted she had anything to say that I wanted to hear. Some boundaries needed to remain. But I did write a letter to the parole board for when she eventually came up for early release. I kept it factual. I explained what she had done, the impact it had on the community, and my opinion that she should serve her full sentence. I was not vindictive about it, just honest. She had committed serious crimes and needed to face the consequences. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I spent my mornings working. I ran a small consulting business helping other property owners navigate land use issues. Turned out my experience was valuable to others dealing with HOA overreach or property disputes. I spent my afternoons maintaining my property and enjoying the mountains. The ski season that year was exceptional. We got dumped on from November through March, and the powder on my slope was incredible. I had more neighbors than ever coming up to ski, and it was fun having company. I even organized a few informal races, setting up gates and timing people on their runs. It became a weekly tradition through January and February. One Saturday in late February, I was standing at the base timing someone's run when Tom skied down and pulled up beside me. You know, this is what Barbara claimed she wanted. Community coming together, everyone enjoying the mountain. She just went about it in literally the worst possible way. She wanted control and money, I said. The community stuff was just the excuse. True. But still, it is kind of ironic that her criminal scheme resulted in all this. He gestured at the families skiing and playing in the snow around us. Sometimes good things come from bad situations. Does not make the bad situation okay, though. Fair point. We watched a kid, maybe 10 years old, complete a run and pump his fist when he saw his time. His parents cheered from the bottom. You should charge admission, Tom joked. You could make a fortune. Then it would be a business and I would need insurance and liability releases and it would stop being fun. Good point. Well, thanks again for all this. Stop thanking me. You are making it weird. He laughed and skied off to join his wife. In March, I got an email from Martin Hess, the HOA's former attorney. He was settling the malpractice case and wanted to apologize personally. We met for coffee in Breckenridge. Martin looked rough. He had lost weight and had dark circles under his eyes. I should have stopped her, he said immediately. I knew something was off about the property claims, but Barbara was pushy and I did not want to lose the account. That is not an excuse, just the truth. I let money cloud my judgment and I helped her commit fraud against you and the entire community. Yes, you did. I am settling the malpractice suit. My insurance is covering most of it, but it is going to cost me my practice. I am done as an attorney. The bar is suspending my license. I did not feel particularly sorry for him, but I did not enjoy his suffering either. What will you do? I do not know. Maybe something where I cannot hurt anyone. Retail, maybe. You could be honest from the start next time. That might work, he nodded, looking miserable. Anyway, I wanted to say I am sorry. You did not deserve any of this. No, I did not. But I survived and things worked out. We finished our coffee and parted ways. I never saw him again. Spring brought the usual maintenance work. I repaired some erosion on the slope, replaced some safety markers, and did general property upkeep. The HOA asked if they could contribute to the maintenance costs since the community was using the slope so much. I declined but appreciated the offer. In May, I got a call from a reporter at the Summit Daily News. They were doing a story about HOA fraud cases in Colorado and wanted to interview me about my experience. I almost said no, but then I thought about other property owners who might be facing similar situations. Maybe my story could help someone recognize the warning signs or have the courage to fight back. The interview happened at my house. The reporter, a sharp young woman named Jennifer Klein, asked good questions about the timeline, the legal process, and how it had all resolved. What would you say to someone who suspects their HOA might be misusing funds? She asked. Document everything. Request financial records. You have a right to see them, and get a good attorney early. Waiting just makes everything more expensive and complicated. Do you think HOAs serve a useful purpose, or are they inherently problematic? They can serve a purpose when they focus on basic services and respect property rights. The problem is they attract people who like power and control. You need good oversight and community involvement to keep them honest. The article ran a few weeks later and was fair and balanced. It mentioned Barbara's sentence and the reforms Mountain Ridge had implemented. Several people told me they had read it and found it helpful. Summer brought a new challenge. A developer bought a large parcel adjacent to Mountain Ridge and proposed building 20 new luxury homes. The development would increase traffic on the access road and put pressure on shared resources. The HOA board asked for my input since I had experience with property development issues. I attended the Planning Commission meetings and helped the community negotiate for road improvements and infrastructure upgrades as conditions for approval. Barbara would have probably opposed the development entirely out of some misguided effort to keep the neighborhood exclusive. Instead, we worked constructively with the developer to make sure the growth happened responsibly. The new homes would bring more families, more kids using the ski slope, more community members. By the time fall arrived, I realized how much my life had changed in 2 years. I had gone from a solitary property owner who barely knew his neighbors to someone actively involved in community life. It was not what I had planned, but it was not bad either. The second anniversary of the original construction trespass came in September. I was sitting on my deck, drinking coffee in almost the exact same spot where I had first spotted the equipment on my slope. But instead of anger and stress, I felt contentment. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Community meeting tonight. We are voting on new holiday decorations for the entrance. Your input welcome. I smiled. Holiday decorations. That was the kind of boring, normal HOA business that should be the extent of it. No fraud, no theft, no property disputes. Just neighbors trying to make their community nice. I texted back. I will be there. That evening, I walked to the community center and joined about 20 other residents. We debated the merits of white lights versus multicolored, whether to include a menorah along with the Christmas tree to be more inclusive, and how much to budget for everything. It was mundane and slightly tedious and absolutely perfect. Natalie moved that we allocate an extra $500 for decorations. Paul seconded. It passed unanimously. Tom adjourned the meeting and people stood around chatting. Carol came over to me. I heard you are helping with the new development negotiations. Thank you for that. It is interesting work. Better to be proactive than reactive. That is for sure. We learned that lesson the hard way. As I walked home that night, I thought about the whole saga. In a weird way, Barbara had done me a favor. Her fraud and theft had forced me to engage with my community in ways I never had before. I had made real friendships, found meaningful work helping others, and discovered that sharing what I had made it more valuable, not less. She had tried to steal from me and ended up giving me something, though not anything she intended. The winter season started early that year with snow in October. I was out on the slope one afternoon, doing a safety check before anyone started skiing, when I noticed something that made me stop. At the top of the run, someone had placed a small wooden sign. It read, "Emerson Run. Community Skiing Welcome. Thank you, Andrew." I did not know who had put it there, but it did not matter. I stood looking at it for a while, thinking about property rights and community, about theft and generosity, about control and trust. The sign stayed up. I never asked about it. December brought heavy snow and perfect skiing conditions. The slope was busy almost every day with families and kids. I set up a warming fire at the base and kept a thermos of hot chocolate available. Someone else started bringing cookies. It became a thing. On Christmas Eve, the community organized a torchlight ski down the slope. About 15 people participated, skiing down with LED torches while everyone else watched from below. It was beautiful, a line of lights snaking down the mountain in the darkness. Afterward, we sang carols and drank spiked cider. Tom raised a toast to Andrew for sharing his mountain, to this community for learning from mistakes, and to a better future than our past. Everyone raised their cups. I felt grateful and lucky. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the eviction papers I had served on the HOA 2 years ago. At the time, they had felt like a weapon, a way to fight back against people who had wronged me. But really, they had been a boundary, a clear statement of what was mine and what was not. Everything good that had come after grew from that boundary. Not from tearing it down or pretending it did not exist, but from respecting it and then choosing freely what to share within it. Barbara had tried to erase the boundary through fraud and force. She had ended up in prison. I had defended the boundary and then opened it on my terms. I had ended up with friends and community. The difference mattered. As I drifted off to sleep, I could hear wind in the pines outside and the distant sound of a snow groomer on one of the resort mountains. Tomorrow I would maintain my slope, maybe do some skiing myself. Neighbors would stop by. Life would continue. It was a good life, hard-won and honestly earned. That was worth more than any lodge could ever be.